Hi, I'm Limo Milan, and we're going to look at saving and exporting your work in Ableton Live. So I'm at the stage where I've got an arrangement set up, I've got my mix how I like it, I'm basically ready to take this song and give it to the world. So I can save my project first before I export it. And the first thing I need to do in terms of saving my project is decide how much data I want to save with this actual project when I save it. So if I go to Save Live Set, and I go to my desktop, give this a name, let's say Techno 01. If I hit Save as it is, and I go to the location of that folder, which is my desktop, and open that up, what's happened is Ableton Live has saved a .als file. And that contains all of my sequencing information, all the details of the files I've used and so on across the whole project. What it hasn't actually done is localized the information that I've used. So the audio files I've used to create my song, they are technically still in the place I found them. So they could have been on an external USB drive and I dragged it into Ableton Live, and just hitting Save Live Set just saves the reference to the location of that file. So when I open this up again without my USB drive plugged in, it won't find it because it'll be on a device that's not connected anymore. So it's a good habit in terms of making sure your projects will open as expected each time you open them up. We actually want to collect all and save. So we go to Collect All and Save, and then we need to choose from this menu what files and from where we're going to save. So we've got files from elsewhere, which is the external location. So that USB drive would be one of those. Or it could be from your desktop, something or download folder where you downloaded something and you decide to use it in a song. Then we have files from other projects. Sometimes people will cannibalize one project and bring new bits in from an old song and put it into a new song. If you choose to not collect all and save that, it relies on that other project still having to be saved on your drive too, because it contains the files that's in your project. Files from the user library are files that you saved within there itself into the user library location, just on the left in the browser here. And then finally, we have files for factory packs as well. Factory packs are the packs that we install, let me just cancel that for a minute, into our live library, and they can be from Ableton themselves or from external vendors as well. If you want to make sure that when you pass a project to someone else that it has absolutely everything that's needed to play that project back, it's worth checking that box too. However, if that song you've saved has like an incredibly multi-sampled brass instrument in there, and it's gigabytes and gigabytes in size, it will collect all that data and put it inside. So it may be more advisable that you tell the person you're passing this project to make sure they've installed that pack, and it saves you the bother of having this huge project. So let's just go back to Collect All and Save. So I'm going to check everything just in case, wherever I've got these files from, aside from factory packs, and press OK. So remember, the difference is if you just save the live set, you are saving all your sequencing information, but not the actual files that have been brought into the project to make that sequence. Whereas if you collect all and save, you are gathering all that external information to make sure it's located in the same place as that .als file, which means you grab that one folder knowing that project will open up on other computers and you can transfer things around. So next we need to look at exporting our track. Now the first kind of export you want to do is a stereo export, to give that to another person, pass it around to other people, or potentially put it online. So we'll look at that first. Now in arrangement view, the first thing we need to do is actually select the portion of our arrangement that we want to export. Now, it's quite obvious we want to export the full song. It's laid out the way that we want it, but we do need to think about certain aspects. The beginning will literally be bar 1, beat 1. That's the way this is sequenced, but the ending is slightly different, because even though I've sequenced different audio clips and MIDI clips up until bar 65. There's actually effects that are on those tracks, and they have decays and delays that take a little while to fade out. So first I need to figure out where those sounds stop completely. So I'm just going to play the last couple of bars before the end of the track, and then watch the cursor until I can't hear the actual fades and decays at the end. Okay, just after bar 69 is where I can hear that the sound has disappeared. So what I want to do, let's say bar 71 to be safe, is I want to highlight from that position all the way to the beginning. So I've highlighted the whole export area. So I'm just going to click and drag and export that section there. Okay, so if I zoom out again, we've accounted for the sounds that happen afterwards and the effects and so on, and we're ready to export. One last note actually, before you export a track to make sure that you're aware of is make sure that your levels are okay. So if we look at the session view, so we can see a more mixer-like layout, we have our master track here. And what we can do is make sure that it doesn't actually peak at the output before we export it. So if I press play, I can see that my song isn't exceeding the master level of the master track. And it's very important not to do that to avoid distortion. So I'm ready to export now, so let's just go back to arrangement view so we're seeing what it is we're exporting, and go to File, Export, Audio, Video. So the first thing we have in this selection box is what are we going to actually render out? What audio file are we going to create or what source are we going to use for our audio file? So this instance, we're going to go for our stereo export. So the sound we're hearing through our master track is what we want to hear in our final file. So we're going to choose master track as that option. However, you may have different needs for this project after you finished it. So all individual tracks will literally export every single track individually as a new audio file that then can be dragged into someone else's sequencing system or their DAW. Now that means that you could take all the individual sounds from your song and someone with a completely different sequencing system can drag those files in and therefore take your work and take it to another stage, rework it, remix it, and so on. Now, another thing you might want to do is create what we call stems out of your project. Now, stems are like a grouping system where you decide no matter how many parts are in your song, what can they be best grouped as? So typical stems would be a drum stem, a bass stem, melody stem, and a vocal stem, if that's the nature of your track. So you categorize all these into different sections. In order to do that, you choose selected tracks only, and you'd make sure that within your project, you pre-selected the relevant tracks that you want to make these exports from. And that will then create rendered stems from your project. So let's go back to where we were. We want to do a master export. Something that I always check myself before I go is have a look at the render start, make sure it is bar 1, beat 1, and so on. And then make sure that that render length is marrying up to what I see of my highlighted section. So it says it's a 70 bar long sequence that I'm going to export. And then looking at my highlighted area, that seems about right. So it just catches me accidentally not highlighting everything that I need to. So the next thing we have, it's grayed out at the moment, is the include, return, and master effects section. Now, if I'm doing selected tracks, so trying to create my stems, that's actually enabled. And what it means is if the tracks that I'm going to make stems from have sends going off to the return track, so reverbs and delays and so on, or if I also have some processing on my master track, so I might have some mastering processing going on there, that will be included in the rendering process. So if you want your stems to sound like they do from within the mix, even though they've been separated out, that's worth checking off. So let's go back to master again. Render as loop is good for when you're making short exports out of a project. Let's say you've generated a short idea and you like the way it sounds once it loops round. So for instance, you might have a drum beat that you're making and you've put a big reverb on it. When bar 1, beat 1 happens on that drum beat, it's not until the kick drum goes to the reverb that the reverb reacts and creates that big sound. Now, if you played that bar more than once, the beginning of the second bar would sound different than the beginning of the first bar, because by the time the second bar starts, the reverb's already had a chance to create that whole roomy aspect. So render as loop accounts for that and actually exports twice the length of what you're exporting and edits just the last half of it, so it sounds more like it's been running for a while. So it's very good for things like ambient effects when you're doing short ideas. Convert to mono literally just folds the stereo image and pans it down the middle so you only hear the mono aspect of the mix. Normalize scans the highest possible volume of your mix and make sure that it's turned up enough to be at the highest possible volume of the file that you make. So that's good for maximizing your levels as they come out of the mix. Creating analysis file will create a .asd file, which means that basically if you take the thing you've exported and drag it into Ableton Live, it will be perfectly warped and sit on the grid. Sample rate is an audio setting that you can modify based on your preferences or your needs, but as a standard, 44.1 kilohertz is the best option to go for. Encode PCM basically allows you to export a lossless audio format. So in this case, we've got IF files and WAV files, and then we have a compressed but still lossless format, which is FLAC as well. So as a preference, I go for WAV. IF is perfectly acceptable as well, in order for you to then pass that on to another person. Bit depth, as a standard, we tend to export a final version is either 24-bit or 16-bit, depending again on where it's ending up as an end location. And then dithering is quite advanced, but it basically gets around a couple of the technical issues of when we're going from one bit depth type within our project and turning into a file that has a different bit depth as well. So for now, we'll just leave that as no dither. If we want to create an MP3, so it's easy to share this on different platforms, we can enable the MP3 option there. And then if we've signed up to the SoundCloud in preferences, we can upload directly from Ableton Live to SoundCloud from this environment as well, cutting out the process of putting that up yourself. Finally, if you actually have video within your Ableton Live arrangement, you can enable, or this box will be enabled, so you can then choose what video format you export as. But obviously for now, that's not relevant to us. And once you hit export, you then choose the location that you want to save this as. So I'm just going to make sure this is named as something appropriate. So final version, and then click save. And then it will render that out as a project. And then you have your final version of your mix available as a separate audio file. So to recap, what we've been looking at is the different saving options we have. So either to save as just the .als file, or to make sure we collect all and save to pull all those external files within our project folder, which makes it easier to pass it along to other people for compatibility. We've also looked at exporting, how we highlight the area, accounting for any delay tails or anything that happens after our sequenced events. And we've looked at the various ways we can export, going from a stereo file that we export through to doing separate exports as stems or as a complete project as separate audio files.